Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to the video. Today, we're going to be talking about the best Western Overwatch League teams. Now sure, this is kind of a difficult topic to talk about because it's almost impossible to figure out who exactly is the best. But today, I'm going to be analyzing these teams and giving my reasons as to why I think which team is the best in the West. So if you guys are excited to hear the best Western Overwatch team, then drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. We do Overwatch League content daily. Boom, let's go. Alright, so first let's take a look at the standings, and let's narrow the teams down a little bit. So starting off, the highest ranked team from the West is the Houston Outlaws at 2-2. Now personally, I think the Houston Outlaws are a pretty good damn team, and they look like they improved so much from week 1 to week 2. Moving on to rank 5, there's Los Angeles Valiant, who are also a very good team. They have a sick roster with a lot of good players. They are also 2-2. Next, we have the San Francisco Shock, who I believe are pretty good and they have a lot of untapped potential, but they're not quite there yet. So I probably wouldn't put them in the running yet for the best Western Overwatch League team, but maybe down the road. Next is the Los Angeles Gladiators, who are actually pretty good as well. They've had some good performances so far. Their roster looks nice. Even though they only have 7 players, they are really flexible and they can do some damage. So because of this, I think they're definitely in the talks for one of the best Western Overwatch League teams. So we'll leave them for the conversation later. Under them is the Philadelphia Fusion, who are also 2-2, who've kind of been in the mix with a few of these teams I've listed already. They've won a game, they've lost a game against a couple of them. I definitely think they're up there in the talks as well, so we'll go over them a bit later too. Then moving on to the Boston Uprising, who are very similar to the San Francisco Shock. I believe they have a lot of potential. They've shown in games against like Seoul Dynasty and New York Excelsior that they can put up a fight. They're not going to win the set, but they put up good fights against them. So with a little improvement, I believe they're in the conversation for one of the best in the West. But for now, I'm going to leave them out along with the San Francisco Shock. And for the rest of the 3 teams, Florida Mayhem, Dallas Fuel, and Shanghai Dragons, I don't believe they really deserve to be in the talk because, you know, they haven't really showed much. With 2 of the teams being winless and Florida only having a win over Shanghai, it just doesn't make sense to have them in the talk as the best Western team. Alright, now that I've identified which teams I believe are good enough, let's take a look at them. We have the Houston Outlaws, the Los Angeles Valiant, the Los Angeles Gladiators, and the Philadelphia Fusion. These are the top 4 Western teams in my opinion. Now let's break it down and go through each team and their qualities, weaknesses, strengths, all that. So we'll just go in order for now. We have the Houston Outlaws. So the Outlaws lost in their first match against the Philadelphia Fusion 3-2. Although it was a very, very close match, they still lost. So you would expect me to be able to confidently say that the Philadelphia Fusion are stronger. But coming into week 2, the Houston Outlaws absolutely dominated the Dallas Fuel. I've mentioned it already in a couple of my other videos, but they completely upgraded from week 1 to week 2. I mean, we've seen the fight that Dallas Fuel put up against Seoul Dynasty and LA Valiant on a couple of the maps. And to be honest, these maps were not close at all. Like first holds, just clear stomps. So Houston is looking very good. And as of recently, it's been coming out a lot that the Koreans especially respect this team more than any of the Western ones. They've said things along the lines of like their individual players being really, really good and talented, as well as their team in the long run is definitely on the best route to become the strongest Western team and potentially a competitor with the Korean teams. So, I mean, if they're giving them this much respect, they've got to be a strong team, right? And I could agree with them. I think long run, these guys have a lot of potential. I've praised Linkser and Jake and Cool Matt, and I've praised all these guys in all of my videos. Raucus, I've literally praised every single one of these players, and whether it was my top 20s list, my top 15 Western players, whatever it was, I've praised these players, and it's just because simply they're really good. They're talented. They all understand how to play the game, and they don't have like a similar playstyle to some of the other Western players that is just generic. There was a clip on Oversight where Cookie from Seoul Dynasty talked about how Muma played Winston, and it was so unique. It was completely different from every single other main tank player in the entire league. He said that Muma would play in such different spots. He would always be in a sneaky position where he can come up on their backline and they'd have no idea where he came from. And he said he's learned a lot from him. And from that outside looking in at the Houston Outlaws, they just seem to have this camaraderie where they all just, how would I put this? I wouldn't say love each other, but like they have this really strong bond and respect each other as teammates. And now there's a lot of good teams out there, but they don't have this specific quality. And this type of quality will take you very far in esports. Now, I'm not going to say yet if I think the Houston Outlaws are the best Western team because I want to take a look at these other teams and still compare them all. So let's go ahead and move on to the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, real quick before I actually get into them, I don't know if any of you guys are going to mention this and say that LA Valiant aren't technically a Western team because they have a bunch of Korean players, but I think everybody by now understands that LA Valiant is considered a Western team. But if there is anybody out there who disagrees, I mean, that's fine. But personally, I believe LA Valiant count as a Western team. Now, let's get into them. One thing about this roster compared to the Houston Outlaws one is I think they have more depth. Now, if I compare the starting 6 roster of Houston Outlaws to the LA Valiant's roster, then they could potentially be better. But if we compare the entire roster of the Los Angeles Valiant to the entire roster of the Houston Outlaws, I think it's kind of clear that the Los Angeles Valiant have more talent across the board. Like, for instance, Envy, probably one of the best divas in the entire league, and definitely from Korea. And then they have Space on Diva, who is probably one of the best divas in NA. Then we look at Silk Thread and Agilities, both similar players who play similar roles, but they're both very talented. It's kind of like almost having 2 Jakes on your team. You probably don't have that same factor that Jake has of being able to lead the team and just understanding what it takes to win, but having 2 players as talented as Jake when it comes to mechanics is definitely something that could be an advantage for them. And we all know soon, I mean, Jesus Christ, one of the best tracers to ever play the game, and is playing like an absolute monster right now. So when it comes to looking at the rosters as a whole, I think Los Angeles Valiant, out of these 4 teams, might have the most stacked one from top to bottom. And because of this, you get a lot of advantages. Not only will you have an insane starting 6, but you also have a bench that is incredible. And I've mentioned this with like London Spitfire. These really strong players, they're only going to help each other get better. And I've seen it in some of the Los Angeles Valiant's like vlogs and behind the scenes videos where they talk about how they have these really good players and they're all working so hard to help each other improve. They're not focused on which player is going to get the most starting time. They're focused on how to improve each other, how to make the team overall the best. It doesn't matter if you're a sub or starter, you have an equal role on the team, which I believe is a great atmosphere, especially for a player like Grim Reality, who might not see much playtime. He's there behind the scenes working hard, helping Agilities, helping Silk Thread, helping soon become the best DPS players they can become. Now taking a look at some of the games that LA Valiant have played, we see that they had a stomp against San Francisco Shock in the first week, and then they had a pretty good performance against the Dallas Fuel. Now their performance against the Dallas Fuel wasn't as dominating as the Houston Outlaws, but it was still pretty good. And then moving into the second week, the LA Valiant didn't really have that good of a performance against New York Excelsior. Houston performed against NY better in their first week, and we've even seen teams like Boston come up against New York very strong compared to the way Valiant did. But then we take a look at that game where they almost reverse swept London Spitfire, but fell short on Lijiang. It was definitely a strong bounce back from their game against New York Excelsior, and it was just very competitive. London is a strong team. We've seen the London Spitfire absolutely dominate the Philadelphia Fusion. I mean, they wrecked the Philadelphia Fusion. So this makes the Los Angeles Valiant definitely look like a much stronger team, considering they almost took them out. I think it could be easy to say that the Los Angeles Valiant are definitely the strongest Western team, but when I look at the Houston Outlaws, there's definitely some reasons that make me think they're not. So let's go ahead and move on and look at the other 2 teams. Now, I said it in my last video, it's really hard to gauge where the Los Angeles Gladiators are at because they've had some tough games and then they've had some games against teams like Shanghai Dragons who they just absolutely dominated. They didn't really put up good fights against Seoul Dynasty or the New York Excelsior either. Really, the only way to judge them is from their reverse sweep against the Philadelphia Fusion, which was definitely an incredible comeback from them. You have to have some strong resilience to be able to do that. But it also makes me question the Philadelphia Fusion, who we're going to get into as well. Was the only reason the Gladiators were able to reverse sweep them because they're a new team? I mean, I don't know. Coming into the regular season, the Philadelphia Fusion were considered one of the weaker teams just because they've had no practice. But after their first set where they beat the Houston Outlaws, a lot of people started rating them higher. But then after that first game, Philadelphia Fusion hasn't looked as strong. They scaved by the San Francisco Shock. Sure, they won it, but it was pretty close. And then they had this fail of a set against Los Angeles Gladiators where they just let it slip for some reason. So it's really tough to balance these teams out because some of them have beat each other, but then they've lost some really bad games. And then like for the Houston Outlaws, now they just look really good from the second week. So I think it would be fair to say that the Los Angeles Gladiators and the Philadelphia Fusion aren't on the same level as Houston Outlaws and the Los Angeles Valiant. Maybe they're close, but considering how they've been stomped in certain games and then struggled against some other weaker teams, I think it's a fair assessment. So now let's go back and look at the Los Angeles Valiant and the Houston Outlaws. Now this is really tough for me. I did put the Los Angeles Valiant ahead of the Houston Outlaws in my rankings, simply because of how good they did against the London Spitfire. But it's almost impossible to know because we haven't seen the Houston Outlaws go against the London Spitfire. Really, the only way to compare these teams is to see how the Los Angeles Valiant and the Houston Outlaws performed against the New York Excelsior and Dallas Fuel. And if we look at all those games that the Houston Outlaws and Los Angeles Valiant played against those two teams, the Houston Outlaws actually looked better in both those sets. Los Angeles Valiant looked much weaker against NYXL than the Houston Outlaws did, and then the Houston Outlaws' performance against the Dallas Fuel was much more dominating than the Valiant's performance was. Although at the end of the day, the results were still very similar. Both teams lost to New York XL, and both teams beat Dallas Fuel. So the Houston Outlaws kind of come out on top in this comparison. But then the Houston Outlaws do have that loss against the Philadelphia Fusion, and the Los Angeles Valiant have that great performance against the London Spitfire. But again, the Houston Outlaws have not played London, and LA Valiant have not played Philly, so it's nearly impossible to make the comparison because they could be very similar, or the Houston Outlaws should just maybe even beat London, or the Valiant could just stomp the Philadelphia Fusion. So to be honest, I'm kind of at a deadlock tie. Now, if the Houston Outlaws and the Los Angeles Valiant were going to go up against each other tomorrow in the Overwatch League, I guess I'd have to make a pick. So that's what I'm going to do here. I think that the Houston Outlaws, if they were to play the Los Angeles Valiant tomorrow, would win the series either 3-1 or potentially 3-2 because they're coming in hot. They had a great Week 2 performance, and I think their confidence could really carry them in this set. We also see New York and London exploit a lot of the weaknesses from Valiant. Now, I'm sure these two teams could exploit the weaknesses from the Outlaws as well, but I think because those weaknesses were exposed, Outlaws seen that, and they could capitalize on that in their match tomorrow. So at this very moment, if these two teams were to face off, I think the Houston Outlaws would be the better team. In the long run, it's hard to say which Western team will be the best. The Houston Outlaws and the LA Valiant are definitely the two top ones right now. But in 4 months, who knows? It could very well be the Boston Uprising or even Florida Mayhem. Honestly, you never know. And that's basically it, guys. Hopefully I gave some good insight on some of these Western teams and where I think they stand right now. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel. You know the way. Overwatch League content on the daily. We grinding out here, boys.